The sun scorched the asphalt of the residences at Havenwood, one of the most exclusive gated communities in Havenwood, California. Inside mansion number 67, the birthday party of Vanessa Montrose, wife of businessman Tiago Redmond, attracted the creme de la creme of Los Angeles society. While champagne flutes were raised in a toast around the infinity pool, Irene Fletcher observed everything from a distance, with the watchful eyes of someone who never stops monitoring, even while serving. At 42, Irene carried on her face, marked by the sun of the Texan plains, the determination of someone who had left Willow Creek almost 2 decades ago to try her luck in Los Angeles, California. Her dark hair, pulled back in a discreet bun, was beginning to show the first white strands, silent witnesses to a life of dedication to the Redmond family. "Renee, serve more canapés on the main table," Vanessa ordered, without even looking directly at the housekeeper. At 30, the digital influencer displayed a body sculpted by a rigorous routine of exercise and diets. In addition to the aesthetic procedures, she never publicly admitted to her 2 million followers. "Yes, ma'am," Irene replied mechanically, her eyes scanning the immense garden. Something was wrong. For 20 minutes she hadn't seen Bea. Little Beatrice, just 6 years old, Tiago's daughter with his late first wife, Clarice. The heat was close to 104 degrees Fahrenheit that January afternoon. Irene placed the tray on the table and discreetly began to search for Bea among the guests. No one seemed to notice her growing distress, much less Tiago, who smiled charmingly beside his new wife as she posed for yet another selfie with a group of celebrities. "Mrs. Montrose, Bea, have you seen where she is?" Irene asked, approaching cautiously. "She must be watching cartoons in her room. Shouldn't you be looking after the guests?" Vanessa replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. A shiver ran down Irene's spine. Something was wrong. She had taught Bea to swim, to ride a bicycle, had dried every tear since Clarice passed away when the girl was only 2 years old. She knew every habit, every expression of that child she loved like her own daughter. And Bea would never stay in her room during a party. She loved being around people. Ignoring Vanessa's disapproving gaze, Irene hurried to the girls' room, empty. She checked the bathrooms, the TV room, the kitchen. Nothing. Her racing heart seemed to want to escape her chest as she descended the stairs towards the garage. That's when she heard a faint moan. In Vanessa's black BMW with the windows closed under the scorching sun, Bea was unconscious in the back seat. Without hesitation, Irene grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and, with all the strength she could muster, smashed the car window. The alarm blared shrill as she pulled the girl from the car. "My God, Bea, talk to me, my little one," she pleaded, carrying the child's hot, sweaty body into the house. Beatrice's face was red as a pepper, her lips dry, her breathing shallow. In minutes, the party turned into chaos. Tiago ran desperately upon hearing the screams, while Vanessa yelled about her damaged car. Irene had already placed Bea under a cold shower, and the girl was beginning to react, slowly opening her eyes. "What happened? Who left my daughter in the car?" Tiago vociferated, his face pale with worry. "I only put her there for 5 minutes. She was throwing a tantrum and disrupting the party," Vanessa replied, her defensive tone contradicting her indifferent expression. "I didn't imagine it would get so hot inside the car." 5 minutes? 5 minutes? Irene's voice rose like never before in that house. "I looked for Bea for almost half an hour. She could have died of suffocation." The guests watched the scene embarrassed, as the hastily called doctor examined the girl, now conscious but visibly shaken. Tiago shook his head, torn between concern for his daughter and embarrassment in front of his friends and business partners. "It was an accident." "Darling," Vanessa insisted, holding her husband's arm. "Irene is exaggerating as always. She's jealous of our relationship with Bea. Jealous." Irene held Bea in her arms, while the girl clung to her neck as if her life depended on it. "I practically raised this child. Where were you when she had a fever for 3 days straight? Or when she woke up crying and calling for her mother?" "Enough," Tiago interrupted, running a hand through the graying hair at his temples. "The guests are leaving. We'll resolve this as a family." Family. The word echoed painfully in Irene's ears. To Tiago, she would never be part of the family. Despite having dedicated the last 12 years of her life to that house, to that child. Hours later, when the mansion had fallen silent and B was finally asleep, sedated by the doctor who had diagnosed early heat stroke, Irene was called to Tiago's office. Vanessa was sitting beside him, her eyes red from strategically shed tears. "Irene, what happened today was unacceptable," he began, without looking directly at her. Vanessa explained that B was throwing a tantrum, refusing to change for the party, and she left her in the car for a few minutes to reflect on her behavior. "Mr. Redmond, please, let me finish," he cut her off. "What I cannot accept is that you caused all that scandal in front of the guests. And on top of that, you broke Vanessa's car window." "I saved your daughter," Irene protested, incredulous. "You exaggerated the situation," Vanessa interjected, her voice suddenly sweet. "B was only there for a few minutes. I was going to get her soon. You could have used the key that's always in the kitchen, instead of destroying an imported car." Irene felt her blood boil. "Are you saying I should have looked for the key while B was unconscious inside that oven?" "I'm saying you overstepped your boundaries as a housekeeper in this house," Tiago replied, finally looking at her. "Vanessa is my wife and Beatrice's stepmother. Her decisions regarding my daughter's upbringing must be respected." The words hit Irene like a slap. 12 years of dedication reduced to boundaries as a housekeeper. 12 years waking up in the middle of the night to lull B, preparing her favorite food, teaching her to read even before school, celebrating every small achievement. "Mr. Redmond, your daughter is in danger in this house," Irene said, her voice trembling with contained emotion. "There is something wrong with your wife, something you are not seeing." "Enough," he shouted, banging on the table. "I will not tolerate you speaking that way about Vanessa. You're fired, Irene. I want you to pack your things and leave this house by tomorrow morning." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Irene felt as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. It wasn't just a job she was losing. It was contact with the child she loved as her own daughter. "Please, Mr. Redmond, think of B. Beatrice will be fine with her father and me," Vanessa asserted, a triumphant smile disguised as concern. "Perhaps it's for the best. You've created an unhealthy emotional dependence on her." That night, as she packed her few clothes into the worn suitcase she had brought from Texas, Irene cried silently. How could she abandon B into the hands of that woman who barely disguised her coldness? What would happen when she was no longer there to protect her? The answer came before dawn, when her bedroom door slowly opened and B entered, her eyes swollen from crying. "Renee, don't leave, please," the girl pleaded, hugging her tightly. "I'm scared of Aunt Vanessa. I'm scared of Aunt Vanessa." B's words echoed in Irene's mind as she walked under the relentless midday sun, dragging her suitcase along the uneven sidewalk of the Silver Lake neighborhood in Los Angeles. She had managed to rent a small room in the back of Mrs. Juneau's house, a woman she had met at the farmer's market years ago. The rent would consume most of her severance pay, but it was the best she could find on such short notice. As she arranged her few clothes in the tiny closet, Irene relived every moment of the previous night. The look of terror in B's eyes still haunted her. "What did she do to you, my little one?" she had asked, hugging the trembling girl. "She pinches me when no one sees," B whispered, looking scared at the door. "And she said if I tell Daddy, she'll send me to a boarding school far away from him. She said no one will believe me because I'm just a lying child." Irene felt her blood boil. She wanted to confront Vanessa immediately, but she knew that would only make the situation worse. Instead, she dried B's tears, held her in her lap as she had since she was a baby, and softly hummed the lullaby that always calmed her. "I'll take care of you, my love. Renee will never abandon you, even if she doesn't live here anymore." It was with that promise that she left B sleeping in her own bed, before being practically escorted out of the mansion under Vanessa's watchful eye. She didn't get a chance to say a proper goodbye, nor to explain to Tiago what was really happening to his daughter. Her cell phone rang, interrupting her memories. It was Marlene, the cook from the house next to the Redmond mansion, and one of the few friends Irene had made in the gated community. "Renee, how horrible what they did to you," Marlene exclaimed as soon as Irene answered. "Everyone is talking about it. How could that man fire you after everything you did for that family?" "That's how rich people are, Marlene," Irene replied, sitting on the edge of the narrow bed. "We take care of their children as if they were our own, but in the end, we're just employees. And how is Bea? Poor thing. She must be devastated without you." The mere mention of the girl's name made Irene's eyes fill with tears. "I'm worried, Marlene. There's something wrong with that Vanessa. B told me things." "What things?" "I can't talk over the phone. But I need you to keep an eye on her for me. If anything strange you notice, call me right away." After hanging up, Irene opened the small suitcase where she kept her most precious belongings. Among them, a photo album she had put together over the years. On the first page, a photo of newborn B still in the hospital in Clarice's arms, who smiled radiantly despite the visible fatigue of childbirth. On the following pages, the girl's growth, her first tooth, her first steps, her first day of school. Irene ran her fingers over the images, remembering each moment. She had been there when Clarice, already weakened by the illness that consumed her, had asked her to take care of her daughter. "Promise you'll love her as I would love her," Clarice whispered, holding Irene's hands with her own, almost devoid of strength. "Promise you'll protect her." "I promise," Irene replied, swallowing her tears. "As long as I live, your daughter will never be alone." And it was that promise that kept her in the Redmond mansion, even after Clarice's death. Tiago, devastated by the loss of his wife, immersed himself in work, leaving his daughter's upbringing almost entirely in Irene's hands. For 4 years, it was practically just the two of them. Bay grew up calling her Renee, an affectionate version of her name that the girl had invented when she barely knew how to speak. Irene clearly remembered the day Tiago announced his new relationship. Bea was just 6 years old and was sitting on her lap while they watched a cartoon. "Bea, I have some news for you," Tiago had said, turning off the television. "Daddy met a very nice lady and she's going to come live here with us." The girl looked at her father, confused, and then at Irene, as if seeking guidance. "Is she like a new mommy?" Bea asked. "Something like that," Tiago replied, visibly relieved by his daughter's apparent acceptance. "You two will get along very well, I'm sure." But ever since Vanessa Montrose entered the Redmond mansion, bringing with her a retinue of assistants, photographers, and a frenetic energy of someone who lives for social media, Bea's life had drastically changed. The girl's schedule was altered to suit the influencer's content needs, as she made a point of posting spontaneous moments of motherhood with her stepdaughter. Initially, Vanessa seemed genuinely interested in building a relationship with Bea. She took her on outings, bought expensive gifts, organized themed parties that looked more like cinematic productions. But Irene soon realized something wasn't right. As soon as the cell phone camera was turned off, Vanessa's smile would disappear, replaced by an expression of boredom or irritation. "Renee, why does Aunt Vanessa only like me when they're taking pictures?" Bea once asked, with the perceptiveness only children possess. Gradually, Irene began to notice changes in Bea's behavior. The cheerful and talkative girl became quieter, startled by sudden noises. She started having frequent nightmares and at times regressed to behaviors from when she was younger, like thumb-sucking or wetting the bed. When Irene tried to talk to Tiago about her concerns, he dismissed them as jealousy or resistance to change. "You've been with Bea since she was a baby. It's natural for you to feel a little jealous of Vanessa," he had said condescendingly. "But you need to understand that we are a family now. Vanessa is trying very hard to be a good mother." Irene's concerns grew when Bea began to show purple marks on her arms and legs. Vanessa always had ready explanations. The girl had fallen at the playground, bumped into the corner of the table, hurt herself during ballet class. "She's clumsy like her mother," Vanessa once commented, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Clarice also kept getting hurt, didn't she, Tiago?" The casual mention of his late wife's name always seemed to hit Tiago like a punch to the stomach, leaving him momentarily speechless. It was as if Vanessa knew exactly which buttons to push to deflect his attention from any questioning. The climax had been the car incident. Now, sitting in her rented room, Irene couldn't stop thinking about Bea, alone in that house, at the mercy of a woman who hadn't hesitated to lock her in a car under the scorching California summer sun. Her cell phone rang again, interrupting her dark thoughts. It was an unknown number. "Hello? Irene?" Tiago's voice sounded tense on the other end of the line. "I need you to come back." "What?" Irene felt her heart race. "Bea hasn't stopped crying since you left. She won't eat, she won't sleep, she just keeps calling for you." "Look, I know things got out of hand yesterday, but we can talk and resolve this like adults. I'm willing to increase your salary." For a moment, Irene felt a wave of relief. She could go back to B, protect her. But then she heard a voice in the background, Vanessa, saying something she couldn't distinguish. "Tiago, before I come back, we need to talk seriously about what's happening to Bea," Irene said, gathering courage. "Your daughter is being mistreated." There was a tense silence on the line, followed by a tired sigh. "Here you go with those stories again," he said, his voice now cold. Vanessa was right. "You're stirring up trouble to keep your job." "I'm not stirring up any trouble. I'm trying to protect your daughter." "Enough, Irene, forget the offer. It's better this way," and he hung up. Irene stared at her phone, heartbroken. How could she help Bea now? How could she fulfill her promise to Clarice? That's when an idea struck her. If Tiago wouldn't believe her words, perhaps he would believe concrete evidence. She needed to find out who Vanessa Montrose really was before she became the perfect wife of businessman Tiago Redmond. And for that, she would need help. She picked up the phone again and dialed Marlene. "I need you to find out everything you can about Vanessa's past," she requested, determined. "There must be something she's hiding. No one is as perfect as she pretends to be." "I'll see what I can do," Marlene promised. "But be careful, Renee. Rich and powerful people can be dangerous when they feel threatened." Upon hanging up, Irene opened the last page of the photo album. It was a recent image of Bea, smiling with her arms around Irene's neck. The girl's eyes sparkled with happiness. "I will protect you, my little one," she whispered to the photograph, "even if it's the last thing I do in my life." Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Irene had found work as a day cleaner in 3 different houses, but the salary barely covered rent and basic necessities. Every spare cent was carefully saved in a cookie tin, her emergency fund for when she could rescue Bea from that toxic environment. Despite the financial difficulties, what weighed most heavily was the longing. During the first few days away from the Redmond mansion, Irene cried every night, imagining Bea alone, scared, perhaps being mistreated with no one to defend her. "How's our investigation going?" Irene asked Marlene, who had managed to get a day off and came to visit her. Sitting at the table in the small shared kitchen, they drank coffee and talked in low voices so Mrs. Juno wouldn't overhear. "It's not easy." "Renee," Marlene replied, looking around as if fearing discovery. "This Vanessa is clever. On social media, she's the perfect wife and stepmother. She even changed her last name to Redmond, as if she wanted to erase her past." "But did you find anything?" "I found out that before she became an influencer, she used another stage name. It was Nessa Blackwood, not Vanessa Montrose." Irene frowned. "Why would someone change their name?" "Usually to escape something," Marlene replied, taking a sip of coffee. "I also found out she lived in New York City before coming to Los Angeles and had a businessman boyfriend there. They broke up mysteriously. It wasn't much, but it was a start." Irene felt she was on the right track. There was something in Vanessa's past that she didn't want discovered, and that secret could be the key to protecting Bea. "And how is the girl?" she asked, trying to disguise the anxiety in her voice. Marlene's expression darkened. "She's not well, Renee. She's very quiet, hardly smiles. I heard she lost weight, and the private tutor who goes to the mansion commented to the housekeeper in House 12 that she seems scared all the time." Irene felt a tightening in her chest. Her little one was suffering and she was helpless. She had tried to contact Tiago several times, but he didn't answer her calls. She even wrote a letter detailing her concerns, which she sent by mail, but never received a reply. In her desperation, Irene even went to the gate of the gated community, begging the security guards to let her in to see Bea, but she was turned away. Her name had been placed on a list of prohibited persons, courtesy of Vanessa, no doubt. "There's one more thing," Marlene said hesitantly. "The new housekeeper who replaced you doesn't last more than 2 weeks. 3 different ones have been through the house since you left. Why? They say Vanessa is impossible to please, but between us, I think it's because she doesn't want anyone getting attached to Bea like you." That night, after Marlene left, Irene couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in the narrow bed, thinking of ways to help Bea. That's when she heard soft knocks on her door. It was Mrs. Juno, her landlady, a 70-year-old black woman with eyes that seemed to See beyond appearances. I can't sleep when someone is suffering under my roof, she said, entering the room without ceremony. What's bothering you, child? Perhaps it was exhaustion, perhaps the need to confide. But Irene told Mrs. Juno everything, about B, about Vanessa, about her promise to Clarice, and her helplessness in the face of the situation. To her surprise, Mrs. Juno didn't seem shocked. Instead, she nodded with understanding, as if she had seen similar stories many times. You know, my dear, I worked as a housekeeper for over 50 years in family homes, she revealed, sitting on the edge of the bed. I've seen a little bit of everything. Good people who treat you like real family, and bad people who see us as disposable objects. Irene nodded, wiping away tears. But what I learned is that everyone has a secret, especially the rich. And secrets are like weeds. If you look hard enough, you'll always find them. It was from this conversation that an unlikely alliance was born. Mrs. Juno, who had worked in some of the most prominent homes in Los Angeles, still maintained contacts with a network of domestic workers. People invisible to the eyes of their employers, but who saw and heard everything. Through this network, they began to unearth Vanessa's past. They discovered that she had grown up in a middle-class family in Denver, Colorado, and not among the New York City elite, as she claimed. Her father was a sales representative, and her mother, an elementary school teacher, far from the golden cradle she described in interviews. But the most significant discovery came from a former college classmate of Vanessa's, now employed in the home of a famous TV presenter. According to her, Vanessa had been expelled from her advertising course for plagiarizing another student's semester thesis. She always wanted shortcuts to success, the woman told Mrs. Juno, who relayed the information to Irene. She was obsessed with status, with appearing. When she met that businessman in New York City, Gustav Mendelsohn, she thought she'd won the lottery. And what happened? Irene asked, anxious. He broke up with her suddenly. There were rumors that she was blackmailing him, threatening to expose some secret of his if he didn't give her money. But nothing was proven. With each new piece of information, Irene built a clearer profile of who Vanessa Montrose, or rather Vanessa Blackwood, really was. An opportunist who had constructed a false persona to attract a rich and vulnerable man like Tiago Redmond. It was during this investigation period that Irene met Helena Chambers, a social worker who specialized in child domestic violence cases. The encounter happened by chance when Irene was cleaning the house of a university professor, who was a friend of Helena's and had invited her for lunch. Hearing parts of the conversation about abused children, Irene couldn't hold back her tears. The professor, noticing her state, asked what was wrong, and Irene ended up confiding. Helena listened attentively to the account about B and the situation at the Redmond mansion. By the end, her expression was grave. What you are describing are clear signs of psychological abuse, possibly physical as well, she said. But without concrete evidence and with the father denying it, it's difficult to intervene legally. So there's nothing we can do? Irene asked, desperate. Helena thought for a moment. We need evidence. Photos of the marks, audio recordings, anything that proves the abuse. But how will I get that if I can't even get into the gated community? That's when Mrs. Juno, who had accompanied Irene that day to help with the cleaning, had an idea. The Redmonds' house is near the back wall of the gated community, isn't it? And on the other side of that wall is Mrs. Zelda's house. A friend of mine for years, Irene nodded, beginning to understand what her landlady was getting at. Mrs. Zelda has a privileged view of the mansion's backyard, Mrs. Juno continued, and coincidentally, she needs someone to help with house cleaning, as her arthritis doesn't allow her to do certain tasks. And so, a week later, Irene began working at Mrs. Zelda's house, a 75-year-old widow who lived alone in a simple but well-maintained house that bordered the back of the residences at Havenwood. From the second-floor window, it was possible to perfectly see the Redmond mansion's garden and pool. With binoculars borrowed from Helena, Irene could even observe the interior of the house through the large glass windows. What she saw in the first few days of surveillance confirmed her worst fears. B seemed downcast, walking with her head bowed in the corners of the house. On one occasion, Vanessa screamed at her by the pool, grabbing her arm hard enough to leave marks. On another, She saw the girl locked in her room for hours, crying at the window. "We need more than distant observations," Helena said, when Irene reported what she had seen. "I'm thinking of placing directional microphones to pick up what they're saying, and perhaps a camera with a powerful zoom." The equipment was expensive, more than Irene could afford with her day cleaner's salary, but Helena managed to borrow it from an NGO that worked with child protection. With the directional microphone, they began to capture fragments of conversations in the mansion's garden. Most were trivial, but some revealed Vanessa's cruel nature. "You're just like your mother, weak and whiny," she would say to Bea when she believed no one was listening. "Your father is only with you out of obligation, you know? He wanted to have children with me, real children, not a crybaby like you." Every word captured was a stab to Irene's heart. How could that woman be so cruel to an innocent child? And how could Tiago not notice what was happening under his own roof? The answer to the second question came when they discovered that Tiago was constantly traveling. The Redmond Group's companies were expanding internationally, and he spent weeks out of the country, leaving Bea in Vanessa's care. She waited for him to travel to worsen the mistreatment, Irene concluded, horrified. She knows that without him at home, no one will question her. The decisive moment occurred on a Saturday afternoon when Tiago had traveled to a conference in Dubai. From Mrs. Zelda's window, Irene watched Vanessa and Bea by the pool. The woman forced the girl to pose for photos for her social media, demanding specific smiles and poses. "Smile properly, you useless child," Vanessa yelled, shaking Bea by the shoulders. "How am I supposed to post a picture of you with that funeral face?" Bea, visibly exhausted and scared, tried to smile, but tears streamed down her face. That's when she made the mistake of dropping Vanessa's cell phone, which fell to the garden floor. What followed was so quick and shocking that Irene barely had time to react. Vanessa grabbed Bea by her hair and dragged her to the edge of the pool, repeatedly dunking her head in the water as if trying to drown her. "My God!" Irene screamed, frantically adjusting the camera to capture the horrifying scene. "She's going to kill the girl!" Helena, who was by her side monitoring the audio, was already dialing the police. "Emergency! We need immediate help at the residences at Havenwood. Number 67, a child is being assaulted." Meanwhile, Mrs. Juno ran to Mrs. Zelda's house, which had access to a secondary entrance to the gated community used by service providers. With the key her friend kept for emergencies, the two elderly women managed to enter and run towards the Redmond mansion. Time seemed to drag. Irene, still at the window with the camera, recorded everything while her heart pounded erratically. Vanessa continued to assault Bea, who was now barely struggling, her small arms losing strength with each forced dunk. Mrs. Juno's scream echoed through the mansion garden. "Let go of that girl now, you wretch!" Vanessa, startled by the unexpected presence of the two elderly women, released Bea, who fell to her knees at the edge of the pool, coughing and spitting water, her face red and eyes wide with terror. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" Vanessa vociferated, quickly regaining her composure. Her eyes, previously filled with irrational fury, now calculated the situation. "I'm calling security!" "Call whoever you want," Mrs. Zelda replied, advancing with a courage that her 75 years did not betray. "We just saw you trying to drown this child. The police are already on their way." While the women distracted Vanessa, Irene seized the opportunity to run through the side garden, jumping over the low wall that separated the properties. Her only thought was to reach Bea, to protect her. Vanessa, seeing Irene approaching, immediately understood that she had fallen into a trap. Her expression transformed into pure hatred. "You!" she screamed, pointing at Irene. "I knew you were behind all this. Setting me up, weren't you? No one will believe you. I'm Vanessa Redmond. I have 2 million followers. Who will believe a little housekeeper and 2 old women?" Irene ignored her completely, running to Bea, who was trembling uncontrollably. Seeing her former nanny, the girl let out a sob of relief so profound it broke Irene's heart. She extended her arms as she had when she was a baby, silently pleading to be carried, saved, protected. "My little one," Irene whispered, hugging her tightly, feeling her wet and trembling body against her chest. "I'm here now. No one will hurt you anymore." Vanessa, seeing her control of the situation slipping away, tried one last gambit. She adopted an anguished expression, forcing tears to her eyes, and ran to the phone. "Tiago, thank goodness you answered," she exclaimed, her voice completely transformed into a desperate plea. "Your former housekeeper invaded our house with two strangers. They're trying to kidnap Bea. Help, please!" Irene could hear Tiago's agitated voice on the other end of the line as she carried Bea inside the house. The girl needed dry clothes and medical attention. Her lip was cut and there were red marks on her arms and neck. "She's lying, Daddy." Bea suddenly cried out, her voice hoarse from crying so much but firm in the truth she could finally express. "Aunt Vanessa was drowning me in the pool. She hurts me every day. Please believe me." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Even from a distance, it was as if they could feel reality finally penetrating the bubble of denial in which Tiago lived. At that moment, police sirens could be heard, approaching rapidly. Helena, who had stayed at Mrs. Zelda's house with her cell phone in hand, sending the videos to the authorities, now arrived, running along the same path Irene had taken. "The police are entering the gated community," she announced, breathless. "They brought a doctor from Child Protective Services to examine Bea." Vanessa dropped the phone, her face a mask of panic. "You can't do this to me," she whispered, more to herself than to those present. "You don't know who I am." "We know exactly who you are, Vanessa Blackwood," Mrs. Juno replied, emphasizing the former surname. "Or should I say Vanessa Goodwin, your birth name? Daughter of Paul Goodwin and Mary Louise Goodwin from Denver, Colorado." Color drained from Vanessa's face. Her empire of lies, carefully built over the years, began to crumble. "We also know about the fraud case in New York City," Mrs. Juno continued, relentless, "and about how you blackmailed your ex-boyfriend, Gustav Mendelsohn. We have everything documented. It was a bluff, of course. They had discovered fragments of Vanessa's past, but nothing so concrete. However, the panic in the woman's eyes confirmed that she had hit the nail on the head. When the police entered the mansion, accompanied by the Child Protective Services doctor, they found a scene that would become the turning point in the lives of all present. Irene sitting on the living room sofa, protectively embracing Bea. Mrs. Juno and Mrs. Zelda standing like guardians. Helena showing the assault videos on her cell phone, and Vanessa cornered, alternating between threats and pleas. The following hours passed in a blur of testimonies, medical examinations, and international calls. Tiago, still in Dubai, was informed of the situation in all its gravity. The marks on Bea's body, documented by the doctor, corroborated the pattern of abuse described by Irene. The videos left no room for doubt. Vanessa was arrested on charges of child abuse and attempted murder. As she was taken to the police station, she shouted threats and accusations, swearing she would destroy everyone's lives. "You'll never see that girl again," she yelled at Irene as she was placed in the patrol car. "I'll be back, and when I do, you'll wish you never crossed my path." But her words sounded hollow now, devoid of the power they once held. The truth, finally exposed to daylight, was stronger than any threat. Bea was taken to the hospital for more detailed examinations. In addition to the recent injuries from the pool assault, doctors identified signs of malnutrition and chronic stress. The girl was underweight and exhibited symptoms of severe anxiety, indications of months of psychological and physical abuse. Irene did not leave her side for a second. Sitting in the chair next to the hospital bed, she held Bea's hand as she finally slept, sedated by medication. She watched every movement, every breath, as if fearing the girl might disappear if she looked away. This is how Tiago found her when he finally arrived in the US, after nearly 20 hours of flying. Standing at the hospital room door, he seemed to have aged years in just a few days. His face was pale, with deep dark circles under his eyes and an unshaven beard. "How is she?" he asked, his voice almost unrecognizable, so hoarse. Irene looked up, exhausted but still vigilant. "Physically, she will recover. Doctors say there are no permanent damages, but psychologically, she left the sentence incomplete, unable to put into words the trauma Bea had suffered." Tiago approached the bed, hesitant, as if unsure if he had the right to be there. He looked at his sleeping daughter, at the bruises on her arms, at the fragility of her small body, and something seemed to break inside him. "How did I not see it?" he asked, more to himself than to Irene. Tears streamed freely down his face now. "How did I not realize what was happening to my own daughter?" You saw what you wanted to see, Irene replied without resentment, merely stating a fact. Vanessa was very good at manipulating appearances, at showing only what was convenient. I should have believed you, he admitted, sitting heavily in the other available chair. When you told me about your suspicions, I should have investigated, asked B, paid more attention. Irene nodded, saying nothing. There was no satisfaction in being right, only relief that she had managed to intervene before the worst happened. The police showed me the videos, Tiago continued, his voice choked, and the photos of the old injuries. My daughter was suffering right under my nose, and He covered his face with his hands, unable to continue. For a moment, only the constant beep of the heart monitor and B's soft breathing filled the silence of the room. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting orange shadows through the blinds. What happens now? Irene finally asked. With B, with you, with Vanessa. Vanessa will answer for everything she did, Tiago replied, straightening in his chair. A new determination seemed to have taken hold of him. My lawyers are already working on the divorce and criminal charges. She will not go unpunished. He paused, looking at his sleeping daughter. As for B, she will need therapy, a lot of support, patience and love. He turned to Irene, his red eyes meeting hers. She will need you. The simplicity of those words caught Irene by surprise. After months of struggle, despair, and helplessness, hearing such direct recognition was almost surreal. I was an idiot, Irene, Tiago continued. I put my vanity and desires above my daughter's well-being. I replaced you, who loved B unconditionally, with a woman who only cared about status and money. The important thing is that you're here now, Irene replied, feeling that part of the weight she carried finally began to dissipate, and that we'll be able to help B overcome this. I want you to come back, Tiago said decisively, not as a housekeeper, but as the house manager and B's official guardian. With a contract, benefits, everything necessary to ensure you never have to worry about your future again. Irene felt tears welling in her eyes. It was more than she had ever dreamed of, more than she believed possible. I would come back even without all that, she admitted. I would come back just to be with her. I know, Tiago replied, and that's why you deserve all this and more. Because you truly love her, unlike me, who failed to protect her. At that moment, B stirred in bed, her eyes slowly opening. Seeing Irene, a weak but genuine smile lit up her face. Then, noticing her father, her body stiffened slightly. "Daddy?" she called, her voice small and uncertain. "Hi, my love," Tiago replied, his voice trembling with emotion. "Daddy is here now, and I promise I'll never let anyone hurt you again." B looked from him to Irene as if seeking confirmation. "Renee is staying too?" she asked, her eyes pleading for security. "Forever, my little one," Irene replied, leaning in to kiss her forehead. "I'll never leave you again." It was as if a last thread of tension broke in B's body. She visibly relaxed, her smile widening a little more. "Promise?" she insisted, holding Irene's hand with surprising strength for such a fragile child. "I promise," Irene replied, feeling that finally she could fulfill the oath made to Clarice years ago. "We will be together now. A real family." Tiago, observing the interaction, seemed to finally understand what he had lost by pushing Irene out of his daughter's life. The bond between the two was deep, genuine, based on years of constant care and unconditional love, everything he, in his blindness, had neglected. "A real family," he repeated, like a promise to himself and to the two of them. Outside, the California sky was beginning to dot with stars. Somewhere in the city, Vanessa was spending her first night in prison. Her empire of lies finally crumbled. And in the small hospital room, 3 wounded people began to glimpse a path to healing and redemption. The road would be long. There would be tears, nightmares, moments of doubt and pain. But for the first time in months, there was also hope, the certainty that the worst was behind them, and that, together, they could rebuild what had been broken. "Renee," B called, almost falling asleep again. "Sing that song for me?" "The one from the music box Mommy gave me." Irene smiled, touched by the memory the girl held. She began to sing softly, the same lullaby that had lulled B since she was a baby. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are, up above the world so high like a diamond in the sky." Tiago immediately recognized the melody. It was the same one Clarice sang to their daughter. Hearing it now on Irene's lips, he understood that somehow part of his first wife's spirit had remained alive through this woman who had dedicated her life to caring for Bea. And perhaps that was the true meaning of family. Not blood ties, not legal contracts, but the daily choice to love, protect, and stay, even when it would be easier to give up. The Redmond mansion, once a scene of tension and fear, was now silent when Irene and Bea returned after 5 days in the hospital. Tiago had dismissed almost all the staff, keeping only Josephine, the cook who had worked for the family for over 20 years and had always treated Bea with affection. "I want us to rebuild everything from scratch," he explained to Irene, as he carried her few bags into the house. "No bad memories, no people who might remind Bea of those moments." The room that once belonged to Vanessa had been completely emptied. Clothes, jewelry, beauty products, everything removed as if she had never existed. Tiago's lawyers had already filed for divorce and a restraining order, ensuring she could never approach Bea again. "Where will I stay?" Irene asked, still uncomfortable with her new position in the house. "I've prepared the main guest room for you," Tiago replied, indicating the spacious suite upstairs next to Bea's room. "But if you prefer to choose another, the house is yours too now." The formality between the two still persisted, like a thin layer of ice that was slowly beginning to melt. They were two people united by their love for the same child, but separated by years of unequal power dynamics that wouldn't disappear overnight. For Bea, the first days at home were the most difficult. The girl startled at any sudden noise. She refused to go near the pool, and her eyes constantly scanned every room, as if searching for hidden dangers. "It's normal," explained Helena, who now visited them regularly, both as a friend and as a professional. "Trauma doesn't just disappear because the danger is over. It will take time until she feels completely safe again." A week after their return, Tiago found Irene crying silently in the kitchen late at night, after Bea had finally managed to fall asleep. "What happened?" he asked, concerned. "She had another nightmare," Irene replied, wiping away tears. "She dreamed that Vanessa came back and took her away. She screamed for almost half an hour before she could calm down." Tiago sat at the kitchen table, the weight of guilt visible on his slumped shoulders. "All this is my fault." "There's no point blaming yourself now," Irene replied, with a frankness she wouldn't have dared to show her employer before. "What Bea needs isn't your remorse, but your presence. To know that she can count on you." He nodded, understanding the truth behind those harsh yet necessary words. "You've always been more of a mother to her than I was a father," he admitted, looking at the cup of tea Irene had prepared for both of them. "Even when I was physically present, my mind was on work, on meetings, on trips." "There's still time to change that," she replied, her tone softening. "Bea is young. Children have an incredible ability to heal emotional wounds as long as they receive the right support." It was from this conversation that the dynamic of the house began to change. Tiago cancelled all international trips for the next 3 months. He reorganized his schedule so he could take Bea to school every morning and be home for dinner every night. Gradually, father and daughter began to build a relationship they had never truly had. The child psychologist recommended by the hospital, Dr. Mariana Towers, became a constant presence in the family's life. Twice a week, Bea had sessions where she could express her fears and anxieties through drawings, games, and stories. "It will take time," Dr. Towers explained to Tiago and Irene after one of the sessions. "Bea suffered what we call complex trauma. It wasn't a single event, but months of continuous abuse from someone in a position of authority and trust." "What can we do to help?" Irene asked, mentally noting each guideline. "Establish predictable routines. Children who have experienced trauma need structure, to know exactly what to expect each day. No surprises for now. And most importantly, be emotionally available. Listen when she wants to talk. Respect when she prefers to be silent." Gradually, the mansion transformed. Bea's room, previously decorated to Vanessa's taste with pastel colors and delicate furniture that the girl couldn't touch, was completely redesigned with her active participation. Vibrant colored walls, shelves full of books within her reach, a tent bed where she could feel protected on stormy nights. Meals, once formal and silent, became moments of conversation and even occasional laughter. Josephine, the cook, made sure to prepare B's favorite dishes, and Tiago put aside work calls during dinner to listen to the little stories his daughter began to share. One of the biggest victories came almost 2 months after returning home. Irene was hanging clothes on the line near the pool when she noticed B observing the crystal-clear water with a mixture of fascination and terror. "What's wrong, my little one?" Irene asked, approaching carefully. "I like to swim," B replied, her voice almost a whisper. "Before." Irene nodded, immediately understanding what was left unsaid. "Before Vanessa, before the trauma, before the pool transformed from a place of fun into an instrument of torture. Do you want to try again?" she asked gently. "We can just put our feet in the water to start. I'll be by your side the whole time." B's hesitation was palpable, but there was also a spark of determination in her eyes, the same Irene had seen so many times in Clarice. "You promise not to let go of my hand?" "I promise, my little one. I'll never let go again." Sitting at the edge of the pool, with their feet dangling in the warm water, Irene told stories about when B was a baby, about how Clarice loved to swim with her in her arms, about the laughter that echoed through the garden on those sunny days. Gradually, the fear in the girl's eyes gave way to a nostalgia for memories she could barely access, but somehow knew were true and good. Tiago found them this way when he arrived home from the office earlier than usual. He stopped at a distance, not wanting to interrupt the moment, watching the interaction between the two with a lump in his throat. There was so much gentleness, so much trust in the way B leaned into Irene, as if she instinctively knew she would never be allowed to fall. In the following weeks, other small advances were made. B returned to school, initially only half-day, accompanied by Irene, who waited patiently in the car until the end of classes. Gradually, she began to reconnect with some friends, participate more actively in activities, and smile more frequently. At home, the nightmares diminished, though they still occurred occasionally. Tiago learned not to panic when his daughter woke up screaming in the middle of the night. He followed Irene's example: calm voice, constant presence, infinite patience. Meanwhile, far away, Vanessa's case made headlines. The downfall of the influencer, who had built an empire based on appearances, became one of the most talked-about scandals of the year. Former business partners broke contracts, followers abandoned her by the millions, and other victims of her previous schemes began to emerge, encouraged to speak out. "Did you see the news?" Helena asked during one of her visits. "It seems Vanessa did this before. There was another child in New York City, the son of that businessman, Gustav Mendelssohn." Irene nodded. She felt no satisfaction at Vanessa's ruin, only relief knowing that she could no longer hurt B or any other child. "How's the lawsuit going?" she asked. "Going well," Helena replied. "Thanks to our videos and medical evidence, the prosecution has a strong case, and with these new allegations surfacing, it's unlikely she'll get a light sentence." It was during this period that the press began to harass the family, eager for more details about the scandal involving an internet celebrity and one of Los Angeles's wealthiest businessmen. Photographers positioned themselves in front of the gated community. Reporters tried to approach anyone entering or leaving the mansion. "This has to stop," Tiago declared after B returned from school, scared by being approached by a paparazzi. "I will not allow them to expose my daughter this way." In a surprising decision for a man who had always valued discretion, Tiago agreed to give a single exclusive interview to a respected newspaper, on the condition that after that, the press would respect the family's privacy, especially B's. In the interview, conducted at the mansion itself, he publicly admitted his share of guilt, acknowledging how his negligence and blindness had contributed to his daughter's suffering. He spoke about Irene's fundamental role not only in B's rescue, but in her entire upbringing. "Irene Fletcher is the true hero of this story," he declared, to the astonishment of many who knew his usual reserve. "Without her courage and unconditional love for my daughter, I don't know what would have happened. Today, she is no longer an employee of this house, but an essential part of our family." The interview, published with the title "Love Beyond Blood: How a Housekeeper Saved a Child and Transformed a Family," generated enormous commotion. Suddenly, Irene, a simple woman from rural Texas, became a symbol of resilience and love. Letters and messages of support arrived from all over the country, many from other domestic workers who identified with her struggle. "I don't know how to handle all this attention," she confessed to Mrs. Juno, who had come to visit her. "I didn't do anything extraordinary. Anyone who loved Bee would have done the same." "That's where you're wrong, my dear," the elderly woman replied, taking her hands in hers. "The extraordinary isn't just in the act of saving Bee that day. It's in your refusal to give up when you were fired, when no one believed you, when all seemed lost. Many would have moved on, tried to forget. You didn't." Mrs. Juno's words touched Irene deeply. Perhaps there was indeed something special about her stubbornness, her fierce loyalty to a promise made years ago to a woman who was no longer among them. At the end of that day, when Bee was asleep and the house was silent, Irene found Tiago in the office, engrossed in papers. He looked up, surprised by her presence at that hour. "We need to talk," she said with a determination that still surprised her. In recent months she had learned to assert herself, to make her voice heard. "About Bee's future." Tiago indicated the chair in front of him, pushing aside the documents. "What do you have in mind?" "I want legal guarantees," Irene replied directly. "If something happens to you, I don't want Bee to be vulnerable. I want to be officially recognized as her guardian, with all the rights to make decisions about her well-being." She expected resistance, perhaps even offense. Instead, Tiago smiled, a genuine smile. The first she had seen in a long time. "It's already in motion," he replied, picking up a folder and handing it to Irene. "My lawyers are preparing the co-guardianship documents. You will have the same legal rights over Bee that I have." A year had passed since the day Bee was rescued from the pool. Autumn had arrived in Los Angeles, bringing milder winds and a sky of almost unreal blue. In the garden of the Redmond mansion, a small celebration was taking place, gathering only the family's closest people. It was Bee's 7th birthday, and she herself had insisted on a simple party, without the excesses and ostentation that marked the celebrations organized by Vanessa. "I only want the people who truly love me," she had declared with the wisdom that children sometimes show, to the surprise of the adults. Sitting under the shade of a century-old mango tree, Mrs. Juno watched the scene with a serene smile. Beside her, Mrs. Zelda dozed in a comfortable lounge chair. The two elderly women had become constant figures in Bee's life, a kind of surrogate grandmothers, whom the girl adored. "How do you feel, Renee?" Mrs. Juno asked when Irene approached, bringing refreshments. "At peace," she replied simply, sitting next to her friend. For the first time in a long time, completely at peace. It was true. The past year had been intense, full of challenges and adaptations, but also deep joys and discoveries. Bee's healing process was progressing more steadily than anyone would have imagined. The girl had returned to being the vibrant child she was before Vanessa's arrival, although there was now a maturity in her eyes that spoke of the difficult experiences she had faced. Sessions with the psychologist, which initially happened twice a week, were now fortnightly. Dr. Towers frequently commented on Bee's extraordinary resilience, attributing much of her progress to the safe and loving environment that Irene and Tiago had managed to recreate. "Will everything go well in court tomorrow?" Mrs. Juno asked, lowering her voice so no one else would hear. Even after a year, they avoided mentioning Vanessa or the lawsuit in Bee's presence. Irene nodded. "The lawyers are confident. With all the evidence and testimonies, it's practically certain she'll be convicted." The next day, Vanessa's final judgment would take place. The process, which had dragged on for months between postponements and legal maneuvers by the defense, would finally come to an end. Irene and Helena would testify one last time, presenting the videos and evidence they had collected on that fateful day. "And are you ready to face her again?" Mrs. Juno inquired, always perceptive. Irene reflected for a moment. "I am. Not out of revenge or anger, but for justice. For Bee and for all the other children she might have hurt." Across the garden, Bee ran happily with two school friends, closely followed by Max, the Labrador puppy Tiago had adopted from a shelter 6 months ago. The dog's presence had been another important step in the girl's recovery process. Having a living being who depended on her, who loved her unconditionally, and who never judged her, was profoundly therapeutic. "Renee, come see what Max learned," Bee called, waving enthusiastically. With a smile, Irene rose to answer the girl's call, leaving Mrs. Juno observing the scene with approval. The relationship between Irene and Bea had strengthened even further over the past year, if that were even possible. Now officially recognized as a legal guardian, Irene participated in all important decisions in the girl's life: school choice, extracurricular activities, medical issues. The relationship between Irene and Tiago had also changed dramatically. The old employer-employee dynamic had given way to mutual respect, a genuine partnership based on their shared love for Bea. Tiago had rediscovered fatherhood, learning from Irene the art of balancing firmness and tenderness, of truly listening to his daughter, instead of just dictating rules. The transformation also reflected in his businesses. Impacted by the experience, Tiago had implemented significant changes in the Redmond Group's companies, prioritizing benefit policies for employees with children, extended parental leave, and even a daycare center within the administrative headquarters for employees' children. What do you think about expanding these policies? He had asked Irene one night as they discussed the group's new projects. Creating an institute for the protection of vulnerable children, perhaps. The idea had flourished, and now the Clarice Redmond Institute was about to be inaugurated, offering psychological and legal support to child victims of abuse and their families. "Dad! The cake is about to be served!" Bea shouted, running towards Tiago, who was talking with Helena near the barbecue. Observing father and daughter together, with Max joyfully bouncing around them, Irene felt a wave of gratitude. Despite all the suffering, all the obstacles, they were there. A family rebuilt from the ashes of trauma, stronger and truer than before. The afternoon passed peacefully, with laughter and lively conversations. Josephine had outdone herself, preparing all of Bea's favorite dishes, including the chocolate and strawberry cake that made the girl's eyes sparkle. After Happy Birthday, when everyone applauded and Bea prepared to blow out the candles, the girl hesitated, looking at Irene and Tiago, who stood side by side. "Wait," she said, her expression suddenly serious. "I want to make a special wish." Everyone fell silent, curious. Bea rarely spoke with such solemnity. "What is it, my love?" Tiago asked, crouching to meet his daughter's eye level. "I want Renee not to be just my guardian anymore," Bea declared, looking directly at her father. "I want her to be my real mom." A surprised silence fell over the small gathering. Irene felt her heart race, moved by the simplicity and depth of the request. "Your real mom?" Tiago repeated gently. "You know your birth mother was Clarice, right? And that she loved you very much." "I know," Bea replied with surprising maturity. "Dr. Towers explained that I can have more than one kind of mom. The one who gave birth to me and is already in heaven, and the one who takes care of me every day." She turned to Irene, her eyes shining. "You're already my mom in my heart. I just wanted it to be official." Irene felt tears stream down her face, unable to hold them back. "Oh, my little one," she whispered, hugging the girl tightly. "It would be the greatest honor of my life." Tiago, visibly emotional, cleared his throat before speaking. "We can make that happen, Bea. In fact—" He exchanged a meaningful look with Helena, who nodded encouragingly. "I was already thinking of talking to Irene about it." Later, when the party was winding down and guests were starting to leave, Tiago asked for a moment alone with Irene. They walked through the garden until they reached a wooden bench under a jaboticaba tree laden with fruit. "Bea caught me by surprise today," he began, sitting next to Irene. "But actually she just verbalized something I've been thinking about for some time." Irene watched him attentively, sensing that something important was about to be said. "What happened to our family, all this tragedy? It made me reevaluate many things," he continued, "especially what truly matters in life, and what real family means." "Family isn't just blood," Irene replied softly. "It's who's there in difficult times, who loves unconditionally." "Exactly," Tiago agreed, taking her hands in his. "You have been a mother to Bea in every way that matters. You love her, protect her, guide her. You deserve to be officially recognized as such. What exactly are you proposing?" Irene asked, her heart racing. "Legal adoption," he replied directly. "I want you to adopt Bea as your daughter, with all the rights and responsibilities that implies." Irene blinked, astonished by the proposal. It was more than she had ever imagined, more than she had dared to dream. "Is that possible?" Legally, I mean. Helena helped me research, Tiago explained. It is possible. It would be a joint adoption, maintaining my rights as a biological father. The lawyers are already preparing the documentation. Irene remained silent for a few moments, absorbing the magnitude of what was being offered. From domestic worker to adoptive mother, a journey that seemed almost unbelievable. I don't know what to say, she finally admitted, her voice choked with emotion. Say. Yes, Tiago replied simply. Say you'll continue to be the wonderful mother B already considers you to be. Yes, Irene whispered, tears now flowing freely. 1,000 times yes. That night, when everyone had left and the mansion had returned to its usual silence, Irene entered B's room for their usual nightly ritual. A glass of water, checking the nightlight, a good-night kiss. She found the girl already in bed but still awake, her eyes fixed on the starry ceiling they had painted together. What are you thinking about, my little one? She asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. How everything changed, B replied, turning to face her. Do you remember when we were scared all the time? Irene nodded, her heart aching with the memory. I do remember, but that time is over. No one will make you scared anymore. B smiled, reaching out to touch Irene's face with that gentleness that always surprised her. I know, because I have you and Daddy now. For real? As she stroked her daughter's hair, yes, her daughter, Irene thought about how extraordinary the human heart's capacity for healing was. A year ago, they were at rock bottom, facing one of the darkest moments they could imagine. Now they were rebuilding something beautiful from the ruins, proving that love, when true and persistent, can overcome even the deepest wounds. Mommy, B called, already half asleep. It was the first time she had called her that, and the sound of that word was like music to Irene's ears. Yes, my little one? Do you think my first mom, the one in heaven, would be happy to see you taking care of me? Irene smiled, remembering the promise made to Clarice so many years ago on her hospital bed. A promise she had kept in her heart and fulfilled against all odds. I'm sure she would, my love. I'm sure she's smiling right now, seeing how loved and protected you are. B nodded, satisfied with the answer, and closed her eyes, giving herself over to sleep with the confidence of someone who knows they will be safe upon waking. The next morning, as she prepared for Vanessa's final trial, Irene paused for a moment before the mirror. The woman who looked back at her was no longer the same one who had arrived in Los Angeles almost 20 years ago, scared and full of uncertainties. There was now a dignity in her gaze, a serene strength that came from having faced the worst and survived, not just to tell the story, but to rewrite it with brighter colors. In court, sitting between Helena and Tiago, Irene heard the sentence delivered with a calm that surprised even herself. 5 years in prison for Vanessa, in addition to the forfeiture of all assets acquired during her marriage to Tiago. It wasn't vengeance she felt, but a profound relief. The cycle was complete, justice had been done. Leaving the courthouse under the sunny California sky, Irene finally felt they could turn the page. Vanessa's shadow no longer loomed over their lives. The future that lay ahead was bright, full of possibilities that once seemed unattainable. That night, after picking B up from school, the three of them, Irene, Tiago, and the girl, walked along Santa Monica Beach, barefoot on the sand still warm from the day. B ran ahead, chasing seagulls and laughing freely, while Max, the Labrador, accompanied her with joyful barks. She's truly happy, Tiago commented, watching his daughter with a smile. She is, Irene agreed. And do you know why? Because now she has what every child deserves: security, respect, and unconditional love. Thanks to you, he replied, taking her hand with a naturalness that still surprised her. You saved us, Irene, not just B, but me too. You taught me what truly matters. She squeezed his hand back, feeling a wave of gratitude for all the paths, even the most painful, that had led her there. On the horizon, the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. B ran back to them, her cheeks flushed by the sea breeze, her eyes shining with that pure joy that only children possess. Come see the sandcastle Max and I are building, she invited, pulling them by the hands. As they walked together along the shore, unconsciously forming the perfect silhouette of a family, Irene knew she had found her true home. It wasn't a physical place, not even the luxurious mansion where she now lived. It was that connection, that invisible web of love and trust that united them. stronger than blood ties, more enduring than legal contracts. It was the family she had built, not by birth or convention, but by choice, by persistence, by love. And that, Irene now knew with absolute certainty, was the greatest treasure anyone could find in this life.